Well, the MLB Draft is just around the corner, which means I get to welcome in Sig Mejdal, the Orioles Vice President and Assistant General Manager. Sig, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Brendan.
So first and foremost, I want to start with throwing a stat at you. Usually it's the other way around. Since 2019, the Orioles have drafted 10 players that have reached the majors. As of July 1st, they have combined for a 32.4 baseball reference WAR, which is more than double all but one other team in baseball, their draft classes over that same stretch. What does a stat like that mean to you to hear?
No, that's great to hear. I didn't know the specifics of it, as you put it, but that's great to hear. I've seen our drafted players out the window in Camden Yards doing well there, so it's nice to see. I think anytime you've had success, it's a combination of the quality of the decisions you make and luck. And we definitely can't control the luck part, but we're doing all we can to make the best decisions.
Yeah, you have certainly controlled the variables that you can. And with that, over the last 5 years, you guys have had a ton of success with the Major League Baseball draft. But how do you, as you approach a new draft here, balance, okay, we don't want to change something that's been working versus making sure that we're still innovating and pushing forward?
Yeah. I love the trait of a modesty or even an insecurity in the processes that we have. So that often drives the person to be double checking, triple checking, to have this almost paranoid behavior on what we might be missing. And I think that describes well the analysts, the scouting analysts that are all involved in the process. They're always looking for how we could improve it, what other teams might be doing, how do we stay ahead or keep improving. And that's a wonderful trait to have, and it's a wonderful trait to have with your coworkers.
Now, I love getting to talk to you before the draft every year, and it's allowed me the opportunity to learn some answers and which questions to ask you here, because in the past I've asked you, okay, tell me about the strength of the draft class, to which you've kind of said, well, if you find your guys, it doesn't really matter. So I'll rephrase in, the range that you have in 22 to 32, do you feel like there are a lot of your types of guys in that area?
Yeah, I think there's more of our types of guys at the very top. But for good reason, we're drafting later in the first round, and that's nice. But yeah, there's skilled players throughout. The challenge is the same of the guys available to us. Which one of these do we think has a better chance to be productive on the field out there? And whether it's the top of the first, the bottom of the first, or the 19th round, the exercise is the same.
Well, the strength of this draft class in particular seems to be the depth of the college hitters, especially as you go towards the back half of the first round. Do you kind of have a similar evaluation there?
Yeah, it's always hard to know how much to believe the descriptions that this draft is strong with this or weak with this. But I think if you look at the mock drafts in the first round and the number of high school pitchers this year compared to the past, there's little tweaks and things are a little bit different.
Yeah, seems to be up the Orioles' alley, potentially at the back half of the first round here. Last year, with your first round selection in Enrique Bradfield Jr., that was a player who had really loud tools in specific areas. Yeah. It was the speed and defense that were borderline 80 grades. There are some guys in this draft class that have similar qualities. Vance Honeycutt, a 70 grade speed. Dakota Jordan, possibly 70 grade power. Do you think the back half of the first round is a good place to find those types of players that maybe have one trait that really jumps off the page?
Yeah, I think so. You may find guys with this extraordinary attribute or extraordinary tool trait, as you put it. I think they're available in the back half of the first and not the front half of the first for other reasons. When you amass all their traits and you do the best you can to quantify it, they come out a little bit below the ones that go ahead of them. But certainly in the first round, you're going to find guys that there's a lot to be excited about.
Now, speaking of loud traits, I am contractually obligated to ask you at least one pitching question in the draft. A guy like Brody Brecht out of Iowa. We have heard so much about his stuff. It is possibly a 70 grade fastball, 70 grade slider. Some draft evaluators have said that he could be on the Mount Rushmore of pitching stuff that we have seen in college baseball. The question marks come with the command. Yep. You guys have done a nice job of developing pitchers once they're in your organization who maybe have a hard time finding the strike zone and getting in the strike zone a little bit more. How difficult is it at this stage to evaluate whether or not a pitcher can find that command down the line?
That's an age-old question in the draft. Yeah, it's impossible not to look at his stuff, to look at his numbers, his success when he's around the strike zone and not dream on him and imagine what he could be if he lives around the strike zone a bit more. But we're eventually going to get evaluated on real life. And so I think we need to be sober and realistic on the chances of a person developing that control. And it takes place. Sometimes it doesn't take place. Sometimes it happens surprisingly quick and surprisingly efficiently. So we'll see. That's a challenge for us as the decision makers to quantify that well. And he's not the first person that's come with great stuff and not elite command. We have a collection of pitching coaches, biomechanists who are looking closely and coming up with perhaps a more descriptive, a more realistic expectation of what improvements a player like that can make.
Yeah, and finally, a bit of a fun one here. Durangelo Sanger is an ambidextrous pitcher out of Mississippi State. He can hit 90-plus miles an hour as both a right-handed and a left-handed pitcher. Is it a fun exercise to try to evaluate and predict what a guy like that can do at the next level when we've really only seen it one other time in Major League Baseball before?
Yeah, that's the fun part of the draft. We could try to make sense in general, but these are human beings, and there's going to be some very specific, interesting combination of skills that we haven't seen. And in this case, we've seen it, maybe Pat Venditti, a sample of one. And so there definitely is more uncertainty with a player like that, but there's also, the discussions are much more interesting than a typical generic player. And so we'll see. He'll be on our board. We'll see if we end up with him, but either way, there's going to be an outsized amount of discussion for a player like him.
Well, even with a lot of fun happening at the big league level, we know the draft is still a huge time of year for the Baltimore Orioles, and we are excited and glad to have Sig Mejdal with us here. Sig, thank you.
This is fun. Anytime you need me.